Good evening. The BBC presenter Gary Lineker says he will continue to try and speak up for those who have no voice after being criticised by Downing Street and some Conservative MPs for making negative comments about the government's new illegal migration bill. Yesterday, he said the government's language regarding its asylum plans was not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. The BBC has impartiality guidelines that require BBC staff and presenters to keep personal views private. This includes making public comments, including on social media, that could compromise perceptions of BBC impartiality. Today, the corporation said it is having a frank conversation with him about the tweet. Here's our culture editor, Katie Razzle.
Has Gary Lineker, one of the BBC's most high-profile presenters, broken BBC impartiality rules? Terming the government's new immigration plans beyond awful on Twitter, the Match of the Day presenter then responded to a critic by calling the policy immeasurably cruel, adding that the language used is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. That, of course, was when the Nazis were rising to power. The Home Secretary hit back.
I'm disappointed. Obviously, I think it's unhelpful to compare our measures, which are lawful, proportionate and indeed compassionate, to 1930s Germany.
Hi, I'm Mr. Davey.
The Director General, Tim Davey, is having what's termed a frank conversation with the Match of the Day presenter.
I wouldn't reveal anything in terms of, I think it's totally appropriate that we speak privately to members of the team.
But the tweets are problematic for the Director General, who has put impartiality at the heart of his leadership as a way to try and ensure everyone feels the BBC represents its views. Impartiality is the expectation that BBC staff and on-air talent must leave their personal views at the front door. It applies particularly to people who work in news. Because Gary Lineker works in sport, the risks of compromising impartiality are deemed lower. Some, though, say the guidelines aren't clear enough.
Clearly, this kind of row that's erupted, not for the first time, does damage the BBC. It damages the BBC's reputation for impartiality. It damages trust in the BBC. Yet Gary Lineker would argue he's perfectly entitled to say what he wants in his private life. So until this gets sorted out, the relationship within the BBC and freelancers and the relationship with impartiality guidelines, then it's going to go on being damaging to the BBC.
Gary Lineker has previously explained his approach here on the BBC's media show in 2021.
When I write a tweet, I will read it through, and if I have a 1% doubt about it, I won't send it.
Last year, though, the presenter was found to have broken BBC rules over a tweet about the then Foreign Secretary urging Premier League teams to boycott the Champions League final in Russia. He asked if her party will hand back their donations from Russian donors. The BBC Complaints Unit ruled he had additional responsibility as a high-profile BBC presenter and should avoid taking sides on party political issues. With the BBC under scrutiny, high-profile names offered Gary Lineker their support, including Labour's former Director of Communications, now a presenter of a podcast made by Lineker's production company.
He's a football presenter, OK? The idea that because he works for the BBC, he shouldn't be allowed to tweet occasionally what he thinks is a nonsense.
With some Conservative MPs demanding the BBC sack him, Gary Lineker took to Twitter again today to say he was getting a lot of praise for his stand, adding that he'll continue to try and speak up for those poor souls that have no voice. Katie Razzle, BBC News.